Labdien and welcome to the latest episode of my vlog. We're here in Riga, the capital of Latvia. Once a major city in the former Soviet Union, it is one of the most interesting capitals to explore in Eastern Europe today. I've always wanted to visit Riga simply because there are three Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. Having visited the other two, Latvia was the last one left on my list to complete the complete set of Baltic capitals, and I'm so glad that I finally made it to Riga. These three Baltic countries used to be a part of the Soviet Union, but since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, these countries have gained their independence and now are part of the European Union. Riga has all the charms of any major European capital city, but you don't have to go very far to find reminders of the former Soviet era, such as in this cute little car I found at the side of the street outside Galleria Riga, which was very close to where I was staying, so it was a mall that I frequented quite often when I was in Riga. One of the most iconic landmarks of Riga is the Freedom Monument. Completed in 1935, this monument commemorates the soldiers who died during the Latvian War of Independence from 1918 to 1920. Latvia was an independent state for 2 decades, from 1920 to 1940, when it was caught up in World War II. Following that period, it was then occupied first by the Soviets, then the Nazis, and then the Soviets, and then finally annexed as part of the USSR upon the end of World War II. So Latvia was officially a part of the USSR from 1945 till 1991, when the USSR finally fell apart after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So you can imagine the amount of emotions and significance invested in such a freedom monument, especially since it has somehow survived demolition during the Soviet era, and it is still standing tall and proud for all to admire today. You don't have to go very far to find presence of Russian influence in Latvia. Here at the Nativity of Christ Cathedral, this is a Russian Orthodox church that was completed in 1883. However, this church was in fact closed down and not used for worship in 1960 when Latvia was part of the Soviet Union. As you know, the Soviet communists weren't very fond of religion at all, and this building was in fact converted into a planetarium. Since independence in 1991, this church has been restored back to its full formal glory, and it is one of the most stunning Russian Orthodox churches you can visit in Riga today. If at all possible, try to visit a Russian Orthodox church during one of their services. It takes the whole ritual and ceremony to a whole new level that you don't see in other churches, and it is quite an experience to be seen. Oh, and in fact, you're not supposed to film or take photos in the church, so I pretended to be the dumb foreign tourist who didn't understand the signs in English and had to put my phone away shortly after this filming. When in Riga, make sure you visit the Riga Central Market, one of the most popular tourist attractions in Riga. Don't be fooled by the name, you'll find more than just food here. Of course, there's lots and lots of delicious fresh fruit, vegetables, dairy products, meat, sausages, you name it. But you will also find handicrafts, shoes and even clothes on sale in this huge market that is located right next to the Central Railway Station. And if you do visit during the summer months, you will be able to get some incredibly delicious summer fruit here. Cherries, strawberries, blueberries and raspberries. How are the strawberries? Zemene, клубника. Это хорошо? Fantastic. Yep, that's a Russian-speaking woman saying klubnika, strawberries. Or as we say in Russian, вкусные, delicious. Let's get zooming of this. Strawberry season, baby. Спасибо. Being a real language geek, it really fascinates me to hear the different languages spoken here at the Central Market in Riga. And it seems that all the signs are written in Latvian, but all I hear around me is Russian. And there's more Russian spoken than Latvian. I hear both being spoken simultaneously. But if everyone here more or less speaks Russian, and I guess people are bilingual, then why aren't the signs in Russian as well? Why are they only in Latvian? As I take you through the old town of Riga, yeah, I could read you dates about when this was built by whom, but that's going to sound like a Wikipedia page, and that's what Wikipedia is for. So instead, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the linguistic situation in Latvia. There has always been a Russian minority in Latvia, so Russian has always been part of the linguistic landscape here in Riga. However, during the Soviet era, there was intensive Russification of Latvia, and there were two key things that happened. Firstly, a lot of Latvians, particularly those that the communist government did not like, were resettled in far-flung corners of Russia in places such as Siberia and the Far East. And secondly, there were a lot of Russian people who were brought here from other parts of Russia and settled here in Riga and in other parts of Latvia and given good jobs. On top of that, the main language of administration, business, and education was Russian throughout the Soviet Union. What that meant was that it created a whole generation of people here in Latvia whose first language is in fact Russian because they had to use it in practically every aspect of their everyday lives here in Riga. Since independence, however, there have been massive efforts by the Latvian government to put the Latvian language first and foremost. English has completely replaced Russian as the default second language learned in schools, and there are strict laws introduced specifically to crack down on those Russian schools who try to still teach their students in Russian instead of Latvian. However, old habits die hard. When you have a whole generation of people who were effectively Russian-speaking, first language Russian speakers, they're not going to suddenly just change the language they speak overnight because of some government policy. So as you travel around Latvia, you will still hear a lot of people speaking only in Russian. You may think that this only applies to the older generation, but you'll be amazed that some younger Latvians practically speak no Latvian whatsoever if they have grown up in a Russian-speaking family and their parents speak to them in Russian at home. Our Airbnb host was one such example. He is a young man of Russian extraction who grew up in Latvia. So when I met him on the first day, I came in all guns blazing, ready to speak to him in Latvian. Labdien, klajumzet! And his reply was, I'm so sorry, I don't speak much Latvian, can we speak in English instead? But at least, hey, I got to practice my Russian with him. Да, я говорю немного по-русски. I do speak a little Russian. It's a bit rusty. I've worked 8 years with Russian people way back in the past, and it used to be a lot more fluent. The old town of Riga is absolutely charming and full of buildings that go back to the Middle Ages, such as the House of Blackheads, which was completed in the early part of the 14th century. Many of these buildings, however, have been restored and repaired since having been damaged in the World Wars. This is the inside of St. Peter's Church here in Riga, and note how a Lutheran church is extremely different from a Russian Orthodox church in nature. Personally, I prefer the Russian churches. The center of Riga is dominated by the old town, and the touristy bit is really quite compact, and you can probably see much of it in a matter of a few hours, depending on how fast you walk and how often you pause for photos and coffee. It does remind me a lot of Vilnius and Kaunas across the border in Lithuania where I visited last year, and do check out those vlog episodes as well if you've not been to Lithuania before and want to find out a bit more. Was Latvia cheap? Well, I think it depends what you are comparing prices in Riga to. It was definitely cheaper than places like London, Paris, and Berlin. However, I still found it more expensive than Romania and Bulgaria, which I have visited recently as well. I suppose with Brexit and a weaker pound, I'm always on the lookout for cheaper holiday destinations. The Daugava River flows through the center of Riga on the way to the Baltic Sea in the north. The airport is to the west of the river, but most tourists will spend all their time to the east of the river because that's where the old town and other interesting sites are. If you get a little bit sick and tired of the busyness of the city, why not explore some of Riga's sprawling green parks? There are many canals and waterways that crisscross the city, and these parks are the breathing lungs of the city. On these hot summer days, you can take a river cruise down these waterways and relax and appreciate a different side of Riga. In the winter, these canals freeze over quite solidly, so the locals even skate on them when it is cold enough. Many travel guides will point you towards Alberta Street, otherwise known as Alberta Street. This is a street where there is a huge collection of beautiful Art Nouveau buildings dating back to the turn of the century. A lot of these buildings were built around the 1900s at a time when Riga experienced a huge boom both economically and culturally, and these buildings are testament to the high life that the people lived in Riga from that era. Today, this area is an upmarket residential neighborhood, but you can also find luxury hotels, restaurants, and even a few embassies in this area. Now, you can also find other Art Nouveau buildings all over Riga, not just in Alberta Street. This style of architecture is quite distinctive and definitely worth a selfie or two when in Riga. In my humble opinion, no trip to Riga is complete without taking a closer look at the legacy of the Soviet era. I am actually old enough to have remembered the USSR as a child when I was growing up in the 80s. And of course, back then, Latvia was a part of the Soviet Union, back in the USSR. I remember the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989 when I was 13 years old. So all these things actually happened during my childhood. The KGB Corner House was the headquarters of the KGB here in Riga during the Soviet era. The archivists have put together an impressive exhibition so you can see what life was like under the communist regime back in those dark communist days. It is important to remember the past so we don't take the freedoms we have today for granted. Another important place you really should visit when in Riga is the Museum of Occupation. This museum is free to visit and it details the period in Latvia's history when it was occupied by the Soviets as well as by the Germans. Whilst the topics presented in this exhibition can be rather grim, the question I have for you is, what kind of tourist do you want to be? One who appreciates the history of the country, or simply one who takes cute pictures for Instagram? I hope I've inspired you to visit the beautiful city of Riga. I had a fantastic time here. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you soon. Lils paldies and ata!